Hello, and welcome to my presentation on the Wells Fargo scandal involving the board of directors and their role in this scandal. Essentially, I'm looking at this from board effectiveness and their role in the scandal, what they should have done given the timeline of facts that we know about, and basically talk about their specific duties and how this relates to what they should have or could have done, and really look at their effectiveness throughout this situation. The board of directors, and they have a few specific duties. Not all of them are listed here, but these are key duties that I think relate to this incident, specifically because they cover areas that either the board made an excuse about, i.e. ensuring accurate reporting is being conducted by top management, or, for example, hiring and valuing top management includes sales executives. They did say, the board did say that, it wasn't their fault, they were getting bad reports. Well, if part of their specific duties is to ensure accurate reporting is being conducted by top managers, to include sales executives who they've hired and evaluated, the excuse, right? Because they have the power to create oversight and they have the power to basically evaluate how these sales executives are doing their jobs, and should have been audited or questioned and not taken on its surface. That is their duty. And they should have dig deeper, especially given the facts that we'll see on the next page, blowers and news media reports of illegal and unethical sales practices. We also look at the advice and counsel and company affairs and how they should be protecting the company against liabilities. Obviously, this scandal created a huge liability for the company. Loss of stock share price, reputation, they lost customers. At the end of the day, this was a bad publicity event for Wells Fargo. And the board seemed to have failed to act. And really, this is a case of negligent supervision in the fact that when managers, supervisors are presented with information that could harm an employee or people, or something negative about the company, they have to act. And the board didn't seem to act at all. They let everything go. They basically blamed the reporting, which they're the ones that are in charge of the company. It all rolls up to them. So this will be further evident as we review the next slide. Wells Fargo scandal timeline of facts. 2013, LA Times did a public investigation regarding sales practices and unethical conduct. This was a story. This is something that if it hits any manager's desk, even a board of directors and CEO, you would think that they would respond very strongly to this. We did not see that. 2007, the whistleblower came forward about fake accounts, widespread unethical and illegal activities, notifying the CEO and bank management. There are reports, many of them, one specifically to the CEO, and also mention, the CEO did really encourage this very aggressive sales environment and the culture. The 8 is great to include a quota. And so in a lot of ways, the CEO had his role. But if you look at this, he works with the board of directors. They all work together as top management of the company. September 2016 is really kind of the official notification that Wells Fargo, the bad news, the cat's out of the bag, $185 million in penalties for fraudulent sales practices. This is really where we see an impact on Wells Fargo share price, and they're finally paying fines for all these illegal and unethical sales activities. In 2017, the board claims they're misled by reports from bank leaders. Now, how much can you really believe this? Remember, one of their specific duties is to ensure accurate reporting. They do have an audit committee, okay? And they have the power to challenge reports if they fly in the face of what we see here is allegations of misconduct within the sales practice. So very hard to believe that they were misled and they had limited information. I would say the opposite is true, and that they basically turned a blind eye. Since 2011, there have been 5,300 employees fired because of the sales practices that were going on. This is a systemic problem. This is a problem, another red flag, that the board failed to act and for some reason thinks that terminations is a way to deal with unethical behavior, which is really reactionary and not proactive. On this next slide, what we see is the impact of the scandal as we look at Exhibit 10, which shows Wells Fargo and its key competitors. You see the change in share price, September 2016, right around the company's fines were assessed and the negative publicity hits. You see a big dip in the share price. That's no coincidence. So this further illustrates an impact on the scandal. Then you have another slide that looks at earning expectations from Q1 2016 to Q3. And then here, Wells Fargo, being the blue column, is one of the worst performing because, what we do is we'll consider how all those fake accounts and invalid sales opportunities made its way into sales forecasting, how that impacted ultimately the company to meet its earnings. Obviously, you can't create an accurate sales forecast when historically the company has been fudging its sales quota numbers, right? So that's what you're seeing here. And in particular, this is at the same time that the negative publicity for the company hits. So you would expect that given 9 years of sales data, and now you suddenly stop, fudging sales numbers, you would expect a drop in earnings, right? And that's what we see here. This slide really talks about the role of ethical guidelines. Wells Fargo is one of many major banks in the United States, but they seem to specifically have this problem. Although there are other banks now that may have this problem, but really this isn't a common problem. So other corporations are able to function and not open fake accounts and promote a sales practice. Wells Fargo did have clear and published guidelines for ethical behavior that ran counter to what was going on in their sales practice. Yet, they had a lot of people violating these ethical guidelines. So, ethical guidelines really need some sort of enforcement, right? Because merely putting them as a company policy is really saying you may lose your job or you may get punished, and that's really the result. But that's a negative way to deal with enforcing ethical behavior. You could create incentive programs to make people follow ethical guidelines and reward them when they do. So that's something that Wells Fargo could have done. Terminations seem to be the policy for Wells Fargo when dealing with an ethical sales practice. That's really blaming the employees, right? That's saying that, these are just bad apples, Well, maybe, the bad apple is the board of directors who seems to think that there is not a systemic problem when they keep having to fire people. I mean, if you keep having to fire people, your vetting process for hiring those people, it's probably not that good. And further, your ability to manage those people is also not that good. So these are things that are in question as well. What role does the board have in supporting ethical guidelines? Should this be incentivized? What role does higher commission or sales incentives play in the following ethical guidelines? Well, consider ethical careers where, doing unethical behavior in the workplace can result in, being thrown in jail. Consider a police officer, right? They basically, any unethical behavior from them is really illegal behavior. And we do see corruption in the police department. But if we compare that to the developing nation, right? American police officers they're harder to bribe. Why? Because they get paid very well and they have good benefits relative to their education and skills. So they value their job, in the same instance, Wells Fargo employees could value their job more if they had incentivization to carry out ethical activities, to have valid sales opportunities. And consider the developing nation police officer doesn't get paid very much, likely easier to bribe, more willing to throw their job away for whatever income they get in return. So incentivization is an interesting discussion because Wells Fargo promoted a very aggressive and highly competitive sales practice, but they didn't do anything to monitor or control this. No mechanisms were in place to control unethical behavior. So really, they're promoting a highly competitive sales environment with quotas, and at the same time, not putting any controls into place so it would get out of hand, and it did. It was widespread among the company. It wasn't just a few people. So ultimately, you would think that the board of directors and the CEO have revisited this problem, given news stories, given many terminations on this issue, and in relation to their specific duties is something that they felt they should have done as their duty. And we did not see that. We did not see the kind of reaction or proactivity or that in place to prevent this from becoming what it was, a scandal. And this final slide, I think, sums up the board's effectiveness for Wells Fargo during this era. I mean, clearly, there's a lot of evidence mounting that they knew about this problem. It was widespread. It was heavily reported, and specific duties were ignored. And this really leads to negligence on the part of Wells Fargo. They basically turned a blind eye because at the end of the day, maybe they're considering that this is something that they're willing to pay for. Regardless of the true motivations, and we'll never know, what we do know is that they neglected their duties as a board of directors to protect the company, their shareholders, and their own employees. And ultimately, they got a bad scandal. So that's the end of my presentation, and I will stop sharing it off to the next person. Thank you.